They say Vivienne Blackstone has no soul-just patents, profits, and power. But when a single father drags her from a burning wreck, all she remembers is the storm, his voice, and the way he looked at her like she was a woman, not a billionaire. If you believe in second chances, quiet heroes, and love born in the firelight, subscribe and stay with us till the last heartbeat. This is one you'll feel in your chest. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady rhythm on the roof of Logan's old pickup as he drove the back highway home. The wipers groaned across the windshield, barely keeping up. His daughter Lily had finally dozed off in the back seat, her small head tipped sideways against the window, a crayon still clutched in her hand. Logan glanced at her in the rear view, then back to the road, his fingers loose on the wheel, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders like it always did. He rounded the bend just past mile marker 62 when he saw it. A silver car, long and sleek, had veered across the slick median and slammed into the divider. Smoke was already curling from under the hood. He braked hard, the tires skidding slightly before gripping the wet pavement. For a split second, he hesitated. Lily. But she didn't stir, and something in him had already made the decision. He threw the truck into park and ran, the rain soaking through his jacket in seconds. The luxury car was crushed on the driver's side, the front end crumpled like paper. He shouted, tapped the window, tried the door. No response. Inside, a woman was slumped over the wheel, motionless. He picked up a rock, smashed the window, then reached in, careful of the glass. The door finally gave, and he pulled her out as the first flicker of fire caught along the hood. She was lighter than he expected, limp in his arms, expensive fabric torn and damp. He didn't know her name, didn't even see her face clearly. But her fingers curled into his shirt for a second, as if she felt something, and when he looked down at her, her eyes fluttered open just enough to meet his. In that one heartbeat, rain dripping from his jaw, her face streaked with smoke and blood, he felt something shift. She looked at him, not with fear, not even with gratitude, but with recognition, as if she were trying to remember where they'd met. Then her eyes closed again, and the smoke thickened behind him. He carried her back to the truck without a word. The fire roared louder, but all he could hear was Lily's soft breathing inside. Vivienne came to slowly, like surfacing through heavy fog. The world was too white, too bright. Everything ached. Her lips were dry, her head ached behind her eyes, and her body felt as though it had been borrowed from someone else. Somewhere nearby, monitors beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. A nurse was adjusting something beside her bed, but Vivienne barely registered it. Her mouth opened, but only a whisper came out. The nurse leaned closer, smiling gently. "You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident, but you're safe now." Vivienne blinked. Her gaze drifted toward the ceiling, then to the window streaked with rain. She tried to remember what had happened, but all she could grasp were pieces. There was the scent of gasoline and wet pavement, smoke, and a voice, low and calm, cutting through the panic. It wasn't the accident she remembered. It was a man's voice calling her back. Hands pulling her from something hot and crumbling. Eyes that held no awe, no recognition of who she was, only urgency and something quiet she couldn't name. She turned her head slightly. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice dry as paper. "Who, sweetie?" "The man. The one who pulled me out." The nurse frowned, glancing down at the chart. "You were unconscious when the paramedics arrived. No one's been able to identify the bystander who helped, but he saved your life." Vivienne nodded slowly, her fingers, still weak, curled slightly over the blanket. The name on the file by her bed read Blackstone, bold and unmistakable, but it felt like a stranger's. She didn't feel like Vivienne Blackstone, the billionaire, the tech mogul, the empire. She just felt like someone who'd nearly died and had been looked at, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she was simply human. She stared at the ceiling again, her heart aching for a voice she couldn't describe and a face she'd barely seen. But the eyes, those, she remembered clearly, and somehow she knew they had seen her too. The morning after the accident, Logan was back in the garage before sunrise. The air still carried the damp weight of the storm, and puddles clung to the edges of the gravel lot. He unlocked the bay doors, flicked on the lights, and let the hum of the old shop swallow him whole. It was easier that way. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. He hadn't even waited for the fire trucks. Just handed the woman off to the EMTs, nodded when they asked if he was all right, then climbed back into the truck where Lily still slept, none the wiser. By the time she opened her eyes, he was driving again, one hand on the wheel and the other gently squeezing hers. She hadn't asked why he smelled like smoke. Now, the sound of tools and engines filled the silence. He changed the oil on Mrs. Talbot's old Buick, replaced the brakes on a teenager's Civic, took a call from a supplier who always forgot his name. He kept busy, like he always did, because slowing down meant remembering, and he already had too much behind him. Still, that woman's face kept slipping into his thoughts. Not the one on the stretcher, the one in the fire, the way her eyes had opened for a second, locking with his. That look wasn't panic. It wasn't confusion. It was like something had clicked inside her the moment she saw him, like she knew she was supposed to be there, in his arms, even if it made no sense. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepped outside for air, and leaned against the frame of the door. The sky was overcast again, low and colorless. A car drove by, kicking up mist from the road. Then another. Then the silence returned. Later that night, Lily handed him her drawing from school. It showed a big truck, a stick-figure man, and what might have been a flaming car. "That's you, Daddy," she said, "and that's the lady you saved." He stared at it for a long time before nodding. "Yeah, that's her." He didn't say it out loud, but he'd been seeing her in his mind all day, too. Vivienne sat in the hospital bed with the covers drawn up to her waist, her tablet untouched beside her. The doctors had cleared her for release, but she hadn't moved. Her assistant came and went, delivering updates from boardrooms she had once commanded without blinking. Her lawyers asked about contracts, continuity, expectations. She nodded at the right times, answered with clipped precision, but her mind was somewhere else. She should have cared that the media had picked up the story. Headlines called her lucky. Paparazzi waited outside. But none of that felt real. Her body had survived the fire, but something inside her felt scorched. Her reflection in the mirror was pale, her eyes ringed with fatigue. But what unsettled her most was the feeling that she was watching herself from a distance. There was one place she kept returning to, though she barely understood it. The memory was fragile and incomplete, but it clung to her like a thread. Smoke in her lungs, the crackle of fire, the cold slap of rain, and his hands, strong, steady, not rushed, not afraid. She could still feel where his fingers had wrapped around her wrist. She could still hear his voice in the dark, not calling her name, not even knowing who she was, but speaking to her like she mattered. She found herself sketching again, an old habit from before the company, before the boardrooms and deadlines and quarterly projections. She drew his eyes first, then his jaw, then his hands. The sketchbook filled with quiet details, not faces, but impressions. Strength in lines, silence in posture, truth without words. When her assistant returned with notes from her CTO, Vivienne closed the book and said she needed more time. The woman looked startled, then nodded. No one told Vivienne Blackstone what she could or couldn't do. But Vivienne wasn't sure she wanted to be that version of herself anymore. Not after the fire. Not after those eyes. The rain had returned by the time she found the garage. A quiet, weather-beaten building on the edge of town, tucked between a shuttered diner and a vacant lot full of weeds. Vivienne sat in the back of the Blacktown car for a long time before stepping out. Her heels sank slightly in the gravel. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, unsure if it was the cold or her nerves that made her hesitate. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Her security team would have had a fit. Her assistant would have begged her to reconsider, but Vivienne had made up her mind days ago. The memory of his face wasn't fading. If anything, it had only grown sharper. Not just the face, but the feeling. Like a door had opened inside her, and standing on the other side was something she didn't yet understand. She pushed open the door. The scent of oil and metal greeted her, warm and familiar in a strange way. A man was crouched beside a pickup, hands deep in the wheel well. He looked up slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth, eyes narrowing slightly as he took her in. Vivienne stepped forward. Her hair was damp, her coat soaked through at the hem, but she held his gaze. "I think I owe you my life," she said. He studied her in silence for a moment. "You didn't have to come here. I couldn't not." Before he could respond, a small voice piped up from behind him. A girl with tangled curls peeked around the workbench, blinking at Vivienne like she'd just stepped out of a movie. "Are you the fire lady?" Vivienne's lips parted, unsure what to say. The girl didn't wait. She crossed the floor and offered a chipped mug, filled with what smelled like cocoa. Vivienne took it with both hands. Logan stood finally. His face was unreadable, his voice even. "This is Lily. She likes visitors." Vivienne glanced down at the cocoa, then back at him. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here." He nodded slowly. "Neither am I." But he didn't tell her to leave, and she didn't want to. Vivienne had not planned to stay long, but the rain didn't stop, and neither did the quiet pull that kept her from walking back to the car. She lingered near the garage entrance, careful not to get in the way. Logan didn't hover or ask questions. He nodded toward an old stool in the corner, and she took it, legs crossed, hands wrapped around the now empty cocoa mug. Lily returned with a box of markers and began drawing on the floor, glancing up occasionally with the curiosity only a child could get away with. Vivienne watched her for a while, then looked back at Logan. He was helping an elderly neighbor with a dented fender, refusing money when she tried to offer it. His movements were calm and unhurried. There was no performance in what he did, no expectation of recognition. Just work, honest and simple. A part of her wanted to ask about the fire, to hear what he remembered, to thank him properly, but she didn't know how to start, and maybe she didn't want to break the spell of the moment. Instead, she reached for a stack of invoices piled haphazardly on a desk nearby and began sorting them into order. Logan noticed, but didn't comment. He handed her a paper towel to dry her sleeves, and she caught a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "You don't have to clean my mess." "I'm not cleaning. I'm organizing." His smile deepened, but he didn't argue. Lily paused her drawing and asked if Vivienne liked waffles. Before she could answer, Logan said they were making some later if the power held through the storm. She said she'd never turn down a waffle. Lily seemed satisfied. Outside, the storm rolled across the hills, thunder distant and steady. Inside, time moved differently. Vivienne realized she had gone hours without checking her phone, without thinking about meetings or headlines. She wasn't being watched or followed. She was just sitting in a garage with grease-stained walls, a child who asked honest questions, and a man who had looked her in the eye when she was burning and didn't flinch. It felt like the first real day she'd had in years. Vivienne should have known the silence wouldn't last. The next morning, her face was on every screen, her name printed in bold above photos taken from behind a parked sedan across the street. She was stepping out of Logan's garage, hair loose from the rain, Lily beside her holding her hand. One headline called it a mystery, another called it a scandal. The worst one called it slumming. When Logan saw the articles, his jaw tightened, but he didn't say much, just turned off the radio and went back to work. Vivienne waited for him to speak, to ask why she had come, why she hadn't warned him, but he didn't. He just moved with a little more weight in his shoulders and didn't look her in the eye. Later that afternoon, the garage phone rang twice in an hour, reporters asking for statements, for access, for the story they all thought they already knew. Logan pulled the cord from the wall without a word. Vivienne stood by, watching the tension gather in the room like another storm cloud. "I didn't want this," she said finally. "I was careful." He looked at her then, quiet and tired. Careful isn't enough when your name turns heads. She didn't argue. She knew he was right. For a while, they sat in the back room, where Lily kept her coloring books and where the sound of the rain on the tin roof was louder than the world outside. Vivienne reached for her sketchpad, unsure what else to do with her hands. "They'll forget," she said softly. "No, they won't," Logan replied. "But I might." She looked up at him, searching his face for resentment, but there was only honesty there, no bitterness, no blame, just a man trying to keep his life steady, now caught in the tide of hers. "I'd still do it again," he added. It was the first thing he'd said that made her chest hurt. The power had gone out just after sunset. No hum from the fridge, no glow from the ceiling. Logan lit a few candles, setting them in mason jars, and the little room took on the quiet warmth of a place outside time. Vivienne sat on the floor beside Lily, watching the child draw stars and suns and tiny animals with round bellies and long legs. Logan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, listening. Vivienne hadn't planned to speak, but something about the dark made it easier to breathe, easier to say things she usually locked away behind glass. "When I was 16, she began. "My brother crashed his dirt bike, trying to outrun a train." Lily looked up briefly. Logan's eyes didn't leave her. "He lived, but he was never the same. And I remember thinking, if I could just build enough, learn enough, control enough, I could stop the world from breaking like that again." She traced a fingertip along the edge of her sketchpad. "I stopped needing people, started building things instead. Faster, sharper, cleaner, nothing messy, no surprises." Lily went back to coloring. Vivienne stared at the flame in the jar. "But the fire didn't care who I was. It just came. And when it did, all I could think was that I'd spent years building walls, and none of them could stop what was happening." Logan stepped closer, crouched down near her without saying anything. She looked up at him, her voice softer now. "You pulled me out of that. Not just the car, all of it." He rested a hand on his knee, watching her. "Everyone burns alone," he said, "but not everyone has to heal that way." The room fell quiet again, except for the scratch of Lily's marker and the soft flicker of the candlelight. Vivienne didn't reply. She didn't have to. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman trying to outrun a train. She just felt like someone sitting still. The next morning brought sunshine, as if the storm had never happened. The puddles steamed on the pavement outside the garage, and birds returned to the telephone wires. Logan was tightening a bolt under a lifted chassis when he heard footsteps behind him. He wiped his hands slowly and turned. Vivienne stood near the workbench, her hair pulled back, her coat open over a pale blouse. She looked rested but uncertain, like she had rehearsed a dozen versions of this moment and thrown them all away before speaking. "I want to help," she said. He raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. "With what?" "Your shop, your life, whatever needs fixing." He leaned back against the truck and shook his head. "I don't want your money." "I'm not offering money," she said. "Not like that." She hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her pocket. It was a formal invitation, cream-colored with pressed lettering. An annual tech fundraiser, her company's biggest event of the year. Black tie. Media. Everywhere. "I want you to come," she said, "as my guest. You and Lily." He looked at the invitation as if it were written in another language. "Why?" "Because people need to see what you did. Not just in that fire, but every day. Because I remember what it felt like to be seen without judgment, and I think Lily would look incredible in a party dress." At the sound of her name, Lily peeked around the corner from the office. Vivienne smiled at her. "You'll have fun," she added gently, "just one night." Logan took the paper, but didn't answer, not right away. That evening, he found Lily drawing herself in a glittery dress surrounded by floating stars. When he asked her what she thought about going somewhere fancy, she lit up like Christmas morning. She asked if Vivienne would be there. When he said yes, she whispered, "Good." He sat with that word long after she'd fallen asleep. He looked at the invitation again, still unsure of where he fit in her world or where she fit in his. But somehow, the thought of standing beside her in that room didn't feel impossible. It felt like the start of something he didn't know he'd needed. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light, the kind that made everything seem expensive and untouchable. High ceilings held chandeliers that looked like glass waterfalls, and servers moved through the crowd with practiced grace. Logan stood near the entrance, hands resting against his sides, unsure if he was breathing correctly. His suit fit well, though he still tugged at the collar as if it belonged to someone else. Lily walked beside him, her dress pale blue with silver ribbon at the waist. She clutched his hand with a mix of excitement and pride, her eyes wide as they moved through a sea of gowns and polished shoes. Vivienne found them before the cameras did. She slipped through the crowd in a black dress that fell like liquid shadow, simple and sharp. Her hair was swept back, her eyes steady. She smiled when she saw Lily, crouching just enough to admire the dress, then looked up at Logan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded, and he followed her into the glow of the room. The gala moved around them like a machine. Speeches were made, toasts lifted, deals hinted at in whispers. But Logan didn't notice any of it. His eyes stayed on Vivienne. Not because of the dress or the attention she drew, but because of how different she seemed now. Lighter, braver, like someone who had stepped through fire and chosen not to be made of steel anymore. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the stage without a note in her hand. The crowd quieted. She began with the usual remarks, thanking donors and partners, touching on milestones. But halfway through, her voice changed. Softer. Real. Some of you may know I was in an accident last month. What you don't know is that I was pulled from that fire by someone who didn't know my name, didn't ask who I was, and didn't wait to be thanked. He just acted. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt human. I remembered what it meant to be seen without a title or a past, just a person. She turned slightly, eyes scanning until they found Logan at the edge of the crowd. I don't want to live behind glass anymore, she said, not after being pulled from the flames by someone who asked for nothing but gave everything. The room stayed quiet after the applause faded. Later, when most had drifted to champagne and small talk, Vivienne stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights blurred in the distance. Logan joined her, his coat slung over one shoulder, the stars just visible through the clouds. I remember the smell that night, she said. Rain, gasoline, smoke. He nodded. And something else. You. She turned toward him. I didn't remember your name. You didn't need it. He said nothing more, but his hand brushed hers. She let it stay. In the space between words and the hush of traffic below, something passed between them that was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, like breath, like memory, like the moment a fire dies and something new begins. He didn't kiss her under the chandeliers or in front of the cameras. He waited until the lot was quiet, her heels echoing beside his boots. She smiled, fingers finding his. I still don't know your name, she whispered. He touched her cheek and said, You've known me all along.